So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining our next episode of Thought Imports Live. I'm super excited to be welcoming Geiga Tertsumia, who is joining us from Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, Greece's neighbor and fellow emerging startup ecosystem. Geiga and I were introduced by a good mutual friend of ours, Carolyn, who's an entrepreneur out in California. So it's been this really fun kind of entrepreneurial connection across the world. We connected and immediately found a common passion for startups, especially in emerging tech markets like the ones that we're living across, and specifically amongst the Balkan region. So before passing it over to Giga to, well, first welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me and organizing this great Thought Imports sessions for whole May for everyone. So thank you for that.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. I'm very excited. We're going to get into some interesting cross-cultural, like cross-tech insights today. And to share a little bit more about Geiga's very impressive background, by education, he's actually an ocean engineer. So as a Pisces, I find that extremely fascinating. He's a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy by training, became an officer in the Georgian Armed Forces, and then a member of the engineering team for the Anaklia Deep Sea Port and Smart City project. By trait, he's always been attracted to the idea of entrepreneurship, now being a true advocate of Georgian startups, Balkan startups, and just global startups, specifically in the field of tech and fast-changing digital world elements. He's always open to new ideas, opportunities, in general, brainstorming products which will bring positive changes into our lives. And after a road of some ups, some downs, some failures, some successes, he and his partners came up with this idea to develop a payment processing platform that makes lives easier for electronic commerce companies, specifically in emerging markets, by automating their payments per their specific needs. So now he's seeing firsthand how baby steps are made for a developing startup ecosystem in a place like Georgia. And so many great founders, developers, and other supportive organizations are really doing their part to put Georgia on the world map of innovations and technologies. And for me personally, really excited to start to just exchange thoughts on the different elements that make up our respective ecosystems. And so it's his personal goal to do a fair share of using his connections and resources with the Western world to attract the eyes of venture capitalists and angel investors for Georgia. And he truly believes that if all stakeholders are involved in these fields, concentrating on helping one another, then we will see a unicorn emerge from Georgia. And I truly believe that as well, from the Balkans and on a global stage, and we'll put all eyes on the ecosystem, the startup ecosystem. So without further ado, hello, Giga. Giga, how are you? How are things in Georgia right now?
So thank you again, Lucy, for this great intro, and again, thanks for the invitation. In Georgia, things are actually quite good. Before we jump in our discussions regarding our specific interests of startups and technology and just emerging markets that we talked about, it's important to understand the ground zero right now is we are just getting out of pandemic, or hopefully things are getting under control. But in general, similar to Greece, Georgia had a very good response to the whole pandemic situation. Mainly because we have a very strong disease control team of all the experts who had some great inputs into government decisions of how to control, how to close the borders. Borders were closed quite early, and the tracing of the cases were done on early cases. So these experts once again showed us how important it is to have very specialized and strong expertise in this kind of field, or any kind of field in general. So that being said, Georgia became a very good example, and I think some articles were written about the country as well, how well the country responded to the pandemic. So right now, everything's opening up again. Seems like we had under 1,000 cases and actually very few deaths, and things are getting back to, I don't want to say to normal, but the new reality. I don't know what it will be like, but again, to jump in with in regards to our talk, seems like many companies in Georgia are also adapting to this new reality, and I know a bunch of established companies, not just startups, that are accepting the reality that working from home is the new reality, and it could be very efficient for them, and they are not fighting the idea that having people at home and working remotely is something bad or something that someone might not have even imagined this a couple months ago. So things are under control in that sense, and I think everyone's how to say this worries and a bit of psychological stress has been drawn down a bit, and things are people are starting to get working on again now. Talking to my fellow friends who are in startups and startup fields, they are. It's interesting because many of them were using co-working spaces, and co-working spaces are yet to be known how they will continue their life after this or with this coronavirus. So that being said, they are finding a bit more trouble as we are in that sense. But I think there will be some new opportunities in this field as well. So it's interesting to see how things will proceed. But as a whole, Georgia is, I think, doing very well, you know, and starting 1st of July, I think we are accepting already the international tourists. First flights will be open, so let's see how that goes.
That's great. I mean, that's great that things are opening back up, and definitely as Georgia and Greece are neighbors, we're seeing kind of a similar trend in terms of things are opening back up. Bars and restaurants are slated to be opening next week, and just different shops kind of have been rolling out over the last 2 weeks in terms of opening, and seeing the new normal is really, really fascinating. And also definitely what you said about co-working. So the co-working space that I worked out of before all of this craziness happened here in Athens, they and also other co-working spaces across Greece kind of doing, finding innovative ways to adapt and create community, which I found fascinating. They were having like virtual co-working sessions where you could just like turn on your computer and like, you know, type together and like just to have some little background noise. And now, for example, I was at one of our clients' offices earlier today, and they were saying how it took about a month, a couple of weeks to adjust to remote work, because especially in Greece where the culture is very like face-to-face, very human, very like FaceTime oriented, it took a lot of adjustment, but now they wouldn't have it any other way. Like their developers are more productive than ever. They're producing a lot of cool things. So the new era is definitely a fascinating one to be a part of, and to see how the startups are adapting.
Exactly. Very.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think it's Greece had a very similar response, so we are in the same stage exactly. So let's see. But what was interesting, I listened to this podcast a couple of days ago on Planet Money, that China is like 100 days ahead of everyone. So it's interesting to take examples from them, what they are doing. It seems like one of the restaurant owners in New York was talking that about the fact that he's talking to his relatives and friends in China to understand how things will be in New York in, let's say, 20 days, 30 days. So he's planning ahead of the time. So we have a good example, so we can kind of watch others who are ahead in this case.
Yes, it's also quite insane because it feels like we're in like a time capsule where like one part of the world is the future and one part of the world is like the past. Um, and because I've been speaking with friends who back in January in China who had posted on Facebook like it, you know, like COVID's going to cause a global recession. I was in a trip in New York City at the time and I was like, what is COVID? Like this is, it's going to be fine. And then my family and my friends were quarantined for a couple of months, and then we did lockdown here in Greece and in Georgia, and like now the States, and so it's this crazy um, kind of like domino effect where you can literally see the future in terms of what's going to happen. And now restaurants
Exactly.
are open, but they're kind of like that. And in China, of all places, where it's so populated, they have to be like 2 meters apart. So it's insane.
Yeah, exactly. So let's watch and try to copy the good examples. You know.
Exactly. And to dig a little bit deeper into your background, what did the Naval Academy teach you about leadership?
So I think you know I don't want to say some like general stuff, but a couple amazing things that it really taught was one thing was teamwork. Actually, how important is the teamwork, and that's something that our like older students, let's say, who were controlling the fate of the first for young like freshmen, were always teaching us was the idea of teamwork and how you cannot achieve much alone, you know, and that kind of really reflects in real world, real life, understanding how important it is to rely on each other as a team and have each other's back when things are getting tough. That was important lesson for me, and trusting each other too. You know, that's very important, and that was a very good takeaway for me in real life, because until I got into leadership position, you know, until I became a founder or having a team members around us. Once and after that, already something that really jumped in from Naval Academy days was leading by example. It sounds very like generalist, but leading by example is, I think, very very important, because your actions are what are shown rather than your words, you know. So I think leading by example and kind of setting out the example to your teammates and being there for your actually not just team and friends, you know, is very important. And one last thing maybe, and again this was something that they shouted us on a daily basis, was the integrity. You know, doing the right thing when nobody's watching is something we had been hearing on daily basis. And it didn't make any sense when you're a 18-year-old kid and you want to just go and relax and sleep and stuff like that. But in reality, when you get out in the real world, it makes your life so much easier. You know, you just do what you think is right. You know, that's important. Live by your morals, let's say, something like that.
Awesome. Yes, kind of really establishing that North Star from yourself during the prime developmental age of 18 and university years. How has this impacted the way that you are leading your startup, both as a leader and also alongside your other partners?
I think that also had been, we had a very good, so the failures we had, me and my friends, we started some startups at early age, right out of universities, when we had our like day jobs, and we did it as a like side thing, side hustle, as they call it. But what was important is that nobody took ownership, you know, like real ownership of the project. We kind of were all like founders, and we had shared vision, but you know, like who was doing tasks, who was responsible for things. It was not really established from day one, and there were some conflicts between each other because someone thought someone was doing something. So not clearly set out responsibilities was something that really hit us hard, and that brought us to failure, but failure in a sense of that specific project. But it was great lessons learned and experience, because it really showed me the road that you actually, if you're starting something with someone, doesn't matter how much you agree on the big vision, that it's very important to set out rules of engagement or the gameplay. And what I have been lucky with in my recent projects was my friend and co-founder is we really complement each other with our skill sets, and I think that has been a very big factor for whatever success, early success, or wherever I have not been at this stage in my other ventures. So being at this stage, I would not call it success yet, but being this far out where we are now has been most important, because we really agreed on, okay, I'm doing this, you're doing this, and we really complement each other. We keep each other in check, and it's not even it's not at all stressful. It's so much fun at the same time, because we have this understanding, and we ask each other how his part is going, how my part is going, and that has been big factor for where we are now. And that's translating in team members as well, because they see how we work, and how we ask each other for deliverables, let's say, and then it promotes this same trust in each other for other developers, let's say, or designers.
Yeah, trust is such a key component, and seeing how it's built across different cultures is also really fascinating, both on a country level and on a venture level as well.
Yes, I agree 100%. And we were talking about this, me and you, that what kind of culture is Georgian business culture, let's say, right? That's very interesting, because my boss from previous project, this port and the smart city project that I was working for, one of our founders was an American guy, and he spent a lot of time in Georgia. He's in late 50s, and he spent a lot of time in Georgia, so he really understood Georgian culture from business standpoint and personality standpoint as well. So it's always interesting to see outsiders' input rather than me talking from inside, So I'll tell his story, because he gave me such a good understanding of Georgian business culture that I really now I believe in it, and you can see it once you understand it as well. He was saying that we had Georgians involved in this project, Americans and Dutch. And Georgians are very, we're Southern, like Greek. You're already, you understand the Greek culture as well. So we are Southern people, and we like to take our time, and we like to enjoy our wine, and we like to enjoy our dinners. And after our work days and meetings and workshops, so we would have these big dinners and a lot of drinking and toasting and hugging and etc. with these people. And next morning in meetings, it was still some very hard negotiations, and that warmth of dinner would not translate into the meeting, and for Georgians, for us, it was really hard to understand what's wrong with these people. We just had this great bond yesterday, and now they are talking on this one contract point or clause or something like that. So that was the Dutch. So the American, I was talking to the American founder, and he was saying that I'll tell you why it is like that. So the Georgians. This is what he was saying. Georgians are 50% business, 50% emotion in business. Americans, he was saying, are 80% business, 20% emotion on a general scale, and which is like the Pareto rule, right? The 80-20 rule, which is probably the closest to ideal. and he was saying, well, Dutch are 100% business, so they have zero emotion, and that's why you guys have such a big conflict in meetings, because those like dinners don't translate into meeting rooms.
That's so true. And it's so timely because right before this session, we had like a port team international business training. We had just talked about this, Giga. We had this port team-wide for our new intern class, onboarding week, like international training and business norms. And we didn't have this percentage breakdown, but I really like it in terms of like business work. Because we were basically, our team is split across America and Greece, America and Greece. And so we were trying to like do like non-American like standards, American norms, non-American norms, Greek norms, but this like pinpoints it. And there's also something that the Greeks do that I like aspire to absorb, but I think I could spend my entire life like observing this habit and still take things too personally. They have this like, again, it's like very personal, like very, how did you phrase it? Like very emotional, like less,
Yes.
where they can actually have, whether it's in a professional setting or a personal setting, they can have like they could have like the most like throw down, drag out, like verbally abusive fight, and then like just to get all their anger out and like express their feelings about a disagreement in the contract or your relationship. And then they're like, okay, let's go. They're like, let's go for a coffee. Like, okay, like, come on. Like, what? And they just set it down. And it's like this crazy like phenomenon in my American mind. I'm like, we just like severed the relationship. Like, this is broken. And they're like, no, what's wrong with you? We're two humans. We like each other. It was just like, we just had a disagreement, which is fascinating. Yeah.
Yes. So that's to give you an insight into Georgia. And plus, Georgia is a very small society. I mean, it's very capital concentrated, and I'll also share my ideas how I feel that Georgia can evolve as a start, like next tech hub but that's pretty much the fact that it's small society. Also, it plays its role as well. Everyone knows everyone.
Everyone knows everyone. It's one big village, as they say. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's much more relationship based, which is what we talked about previously, and also just what I talk about often. I think especially compared to the States, it's way less transactional and more about like sitting, enjoying the coffee, enjoying the time together, enjoying the wine together, and like building that bond is really important for trust rather than just, finding someone on LinkedIn.
Exactly, and I think what we spoke on our previous call when we were talking, that what you are really pushing the agenda is and very inspiring for us here in Georgia as well, is using the Greek American what's it called, the immigrants, or not immigrants, but the Greek. The diaspora, yes, diaspora that is in US, which has so much, probably a lot of success, what I have heard, which can be used. They can relate to Greece much better, and they can be this first big boost to Greek venture capital or angel investing, which is really important. That's something that we have been talking. That's something that Georgia is even more missing, compared to other countries, that there's pretty much zero venture capital here, and there's some like angel investing, which is just based on personal relationships.
Yeah, I think tapping into, yes, we previously spoke about it, tapping into the like Greek origins, Georgian origins community across the world is really powerful, especially since like those qualities that we'd mentioned, like the loyalty, the human based, that's like in your DNA. That's can't be, even if you were raised in a different place, it's part of who you are at a certain part of your core, which I think is powerful. And you spoke about the VCs and the startups. Can you tell us the general landscape of the ecosystem? What does it look like? Which industries are booming? What's the VC world like, et cetera?
Yes. So where do I start? So let's say startups, right? in Georgia, we have some. We had a great push from the fact that there was a Georgia Innovations and Technologies agency that was established by the one part government and one part World Bank. World Bank was really pushing it to have innovations developed here. Georgians are in general very entrepreneurially minded people, so there was always this. Since we broke out from Soviet Union and the private ownership has been reestablished, but people have this feeling of entrepreneurship, and this has been more revived in recent years. So that has always been in there. But then at the same time, we had the up and coming how to say startup scene that had zero funding. And first push that there was this World Bank and this Georgia Innovations and Technologies Agency grant program, by which you apply and twice a year for about $30,000, and it's a grant. So and it can be an idea stage startup, it can be an operational startup. They don't discriminate. They choose as long as the team is there. They more or less invest in the team. So that was the big push. Then, of course, there are some individuals who have established themselves in abroad. Some Georgians who have founded their startups abroad and have achieved success, and they understand the road of a founder and startup founder. So they have been a big push for several Georgian startups, and they have invested, and they really helped them. The Georgians in Silicon Valley helped some startups to kind of do the meetups, initial pitch, and etc. So the diaspora, even though we have a very small diaspora, has been doing its own thing as well. And in parallel, what is interesting is that we have in Georgia two publicly listed companies on London Stock Exchange, which are two banks. And even though they're regular banks, but not private equity or venture capital. They don't do those kind of things, but they are listed on London Stock Exchange, and they have very good, very strong teams and very strong corporate governance. And those companies, what was interesting, they really helped develop, they understood that digital revolution was coming, so they hired a lot of very smart people on their staff, and they themselves developed amazing products. So we have some of the best mobile banks in whole Europe, and they themselves pushed this agenda of entrepreneurship inside their actually team members, and many founders are from these banks, previous employees. And they also started supporting startups with grants, with some programs, etc., etc. And now recently we had a great news that 500 startups has come in Georgia, and in partnership with this Georgia Innovations Technologies Agency and with these banks, they will be first accelerator in the country, which is, I think, one of the last. If we say that Georgia is in its early stage of startup ecosystem development, for this first stage, one of the last major pieces that was missing, because we had some founders who had great ideas. We had some founders, like a couple of my friends, who managed to get into Techstars outside of Georgia and take their startup abroad and raise money abroad, and they paved this road to other startups, Georgian startups as well. And one of my friends who's in blockchain, his startup is called Shelf Network. He has been doing amazing thing, because what I'm saying is this idea sharing is him and other founders as well. They are always available for us, other like early stage startuppers, to share ideas. If we have questions, how did you get to Techstars, or like, can you connect me to someone in Techstars? Like, I think that's where win-win mentality comes in. That we are all in this together, and there's no like competition. And if one makes it, then all of us can. And it's also a paving the road, and also, you know, it kind of gives you more strength, that understanding, oh, one Georgian made it, and we can make it as well, you know. So just a side track here, just this idea sharing and sharing their past has been very valuable. Our first batch is this month, I think, and which will be very important because you already have up to 100 startups in Georgia that are at the stage that can pitch to Western VCs, and having them go through this Westernized and Silicon Valley acceleration program will get them even closer to closing this round. So I believe by end of this year, early 2021, we will already hear some Series A, Series B fundraising stuff for Georgian startups, and hopefully a unicorn will arise here as well. But that has been that has definitely been very inspiring, watching these other founders. And another great thing is Startup Grind. This American expats in Georgia and the Georgian guy, they together build up a startup grind system. Startup Grind, the conference for Georgia, which has been a huge success for last year. So we already have this networking. We have this fuck up nights where founders share their stories. So there are all this like individual, let's say, centers of gravity, and I believe that that is a key. More and more such centers of gravity in this field will arise, the better for the ecosystem. Another great news is my friends founded a startup association, which has a major aim to establish sort of a crunch base for Georgian startups. Because if you are an investor, there's no single point where you can go on a website and find out about a specific start or any startup in Georgia, what fields are covered, what stage are they at of fundraising or product development, who are the founders. To kind of concentrate in one place and having a platform for future venture capital and investors to see these people, see the statuses and etc. etc. So that's where we are at right now.
So a lot of movement, like so many thoughts. The first one is, that's incredible. I think people forget, especially coming from the tech world of America, like Silicon Valley was not Silicon Valley overnight, and like Tel Aviv was not Tel Aviv, all right, or whatever, Silicon Wadi they call it.
Silicon Wadi, yeah.
So it's really awesome to, always exchange insights on the beginning building blocks of our ecosystems. And the other thing you'd mentioned about, well, first, love Startup Grind. That's actually how I transitioned from corporate world into startup world when I was at IBM, and wanted desperately to go and test my experience out in the smaller agile startup world back in New York City. And then also the whole thing about like banks, we're seeing that here in Greece as well, where like a lot of the major banks, well, there's pretty much like a handful, like 3 major banks, and now each of them are rolling out with over the last 2-3 years, have rolled out with their own accelerator programs. So there's a lot, I suppose money runs the world. And so there's a lot of kind of innovation, an urge of like innovation to try to spur innovation in that space and figure out more creative ways to, finance fintech or drive fintech innovations forward. And what are some resources? Well, first, another just thought is, we're seeing kind of the same way that you had that grant spur it, I think Greece was spurred from the whole, we discussed it previously, the whole 300 million euro injection from the European Investment Fund to
The
spur,
Equifund, right?
yeah, from Equifund, that spurred Greek tech back in 2018. And now you're seeing the centers of gravity really increase. Because I moved here in the beginning of 2017, and even back then, it was really hard to find, like, there was one big community that was the startup community, but it was hard to find events, it was hard to find meetups, it was hard to find resources if I was putting myself in the shoes of like a Greek founder that was trying to find local resources. And since the last 3 years, it's just skyrocketed the amounts of just the sheer number of centers of gravity in terms of startup resources. What would you say is what would you say is missing or is would be good to have in the Georgian ecosystem for the future years?
Very good question. Actually, that's something that I have been also thinking about, but at the same time, also something that how to say. First of all, of course, the venture, like having venture capital here. Even we were thinking about doing a roadshow. I have some connections from US. A couple of my friends have connections, and again, I'm not talking. Again, I want to say it from win-win standpoint. I don't want to, like, I was in US right before in November, October. I met with some of my friends who are US startup founders, US based, Silicon Valley based, and I met with some friends who are in venture capital as well. The idea is that, of course, I can personally fly and for my startup when I'm ready to do Series A, meet and like have this arrange these meetings. But I think to have this win-win scenario for everyone and having one for all mentality that I was talking about, it's better to arrange some sort of a roadshow and put the venture capitalists on the Georgian market. So we already have these 500 startups. Why not have some sort of meetup? We were talking about this right before the pandemic started, to have September is one of the best times to travel to Georgia because it's wine harvest time and or grape harvest, and wineries have some amazing events. It's one of the best weather times because it's transitioning out of summer and it's amazing scenery. So Georgia is great for tourism standpoint and food, wine. We are birthplace of wine, by the way. That's official. 8,000 years ago, first artifact was found, which is 8,000 year old of winemaking. So from this standpoint, we have been marketed quite well. Well, the government could have done much better job, but of course, whatever has been done has been done. But now we can leverage this whole tourism standpoint, the tourism benefits to do this also. Oh, you can have a lot of fun there, enjoy your time for a week, and plus you can have 2, 3, 4 days of pitching, for per your interest. So we were thinking to do this tourism / tour or venture capital pitching day versus / tourism trip in Georgia for people who are our friends that are in that industry, that we could confirm their trips quite easily. So that's something that jumps into my mind immediately. But secondly, I think what is also important is having enough resources from we are talking about tech startups, so having enough resources to developers. That's very scarce here. First of all, we are a very small country, 3.7 million people. Secondly, our higher education has been very low quality after Soviet Union broke down. So we have very recently some universities have been jumping up and offering some good programs, but not in high numbers and not consistently yet. So what is the issue, right? You don't have enough resource for developing resource for the startup. So many startup founders have tried to, many developers, first of all, that, for example, work with us are self-taught. My partner, my co-founder, he's a developer, software developer himself. He's self-taught. Most of the guys I know are self-taught. So, and it doesn't mean it's bad, but we don't have numbers, enough numbers. So what I have been always thinking is to have some sort of, actually right before we were jumping on this call or talk, I was researching some topics, and what was interesting is that Georgia, Tbilisi specifically, has been ranking very highly for digital nomads. I think Bangkok in Thailand is one of the top spots, and everyone has been comparing Georgia to like this digital nomads article that I was actually reading on the website is called nomadflag.com. He's comparing it to the Bangkok, and it seems that right before pandemic, they were saying that, oh, Georgia, Tbilisi is like, from the standpoint of like everything that they care, like living cost, weather, people, how hospitable people are, food quality, wine, and gyms, internet accessibility, co-working, everything is here, you know. And not just in Tbilisi, but also in Batumi, which is seaside, and which has a lot of new real estate for like they build a lot of real estate and package it as a like investment opportunity. So you buy it and then rent it out. So there's a lot of real estate, free real estate, let's say, free in the sense that no one's living there. So potentially to be something to be rented out by the expats. So what's interesting is that Batumi could have become another spot, just like Tbilisi. Just like Tbilisi, and this has not yet happened, unfortunately, and I think it still has this potential to after these things kind of like die down for the pandemic. But what I was thinking that what we lack is resource. That's the baseline. But now, what is the answer that I have been thinking about with some of my friends is. Ukraine, Belarus, and post-Soviet countries have a lot of resource from development standpoint. And actually, we had I know several developers who have moved to Georgia to work on startups, to work in banks, in software, etc. And what has been interesting is that they love it. They love it here. Georgia has been this like place, special place for like post-Soviet, post-Soviet countries. You know, they love traveling to Georgia. They have this bond with this country. Everyone loves the landscape, the food, etc. All these benefits that I was listing out. So we could potentially, as a country, as a future governments, we could leverage this in a sense that we could have some sort of packages for these digital nomads specifically from these countries who we know for sure who would love to live here, offer them specific packages. And let's say we were counting, let's say Ukraine and Belarus have more than 500,000 developers in their countries. Why can't you attract 1%, 5,000, let's say, for the start? Just speaking from number standpoint. 5,000 developers, offer them a package, and even without package, they would love to. Many of them would love to move, but with packages, just makes it like maybe some insurance, some I don't know, some easy bank account openings, etc. It's very easy to start business in Georgia, by the way. I think in a touch base that we have very good public registry system, and you can register your company in a matter of like an hour. Register, and it's no bureaucracy in that sense. So you can leverage all of this together, put a package and invite these people over. So once you invite these people over, you already have this very tech savvy people, entrepreneurially minded people who are also sharing this, you know, with the local community. Maybe you start some sort of programs with them of like teaching some short courses, etc., etc. Maybe start translating. I think this already started. The Khan Academy and Coursera courses have been translated in Georgian, which is also recent news, which will push the accessibility to education of younger generation. I'm touching many things right now, but I hope I make sense in the grand scheme of things. But in general, I think lack of resources is the problem. And these are some of the ideas I have been thinking of how to increase it. And in general, bringing digital nomads will boost this. And once you have this startup grinds, these meetups, these events, this also helps digital nomads to integrate in the society and share their ideas, share their experiences. So this is how the society as a whole will develop and learn new things. Yes, it's good to hear that Georgian startuppers made it, but it's even more additional value to hear someone else's perspective from outside. So that's something I hope we can leverage very soon.
That was so comprehensive and definitely made a lot of sense and shed a lot of light into the Georgian ecosystem. So thank you.
Thank you.
What you mentioned about just the general resources, I see also a parallel with Greece, because the resources, I mean, education-wise, Greece is fairly, you know, well educated in terms of secondary education, but I think global training, all of like a lot of Greeks have left in the diaspora. Like there was a lot of brain drain that resulted from the crisis. And so that like talent aspect is also a big challenge for the tech ecosystem. I will say it's interesting that you bring up digital nomads, because Greece is also, of course, you know, with the islands, a very popular destination. And there are predictions that digital nomadism is actually going to be a really, I mean, it's already been quite popular, but predictions that it will be a way forward for also the tourism industries, where nomads will come, settle down. And it's also a really creative solution to the brain drain, I believe, because you're having people, sure, they're nomads, but they're staying for a few weeks, for a couple months at a time. And in that time, they're brushing shoulders, they're having conversations with people that are probably you know, like local entrepreneurs, local founders, local, just locals. And I think that's really, those conversations are really powerful at scale as well. And it's fascinating. The package idea, I think, is really brilliant for Georgia, because you're seeing places like Estonia have like e-residency, making it super easy to incorporate.
Exactly.
Right? And these like micro ecosystems that are trying to enable non-Europeans, non-Georgians, non-Estonians to come to Europe in a really creative way, and to come to just go beyond their borders, I think are really powerful tools.
Exactly, and I think you brought out Estonia is definitely an example country for us, because it's post-Soviet. Even though it's post-Soviet, it has always been very much closer to Sweden. I mean, to Scandinavia, which has had a lot of resources from as neighbors. They were more integrated into Europe than we were ever. So, but Estonia is definitely a good example for us, and we have been following many steps that they have taken. And I mean, Skype is a good example from their Bolt, which is, we have the only not car sharing, but local Uber is Bolt, which is Estonian startup, and it's a unicorn as well. I mean, Estonia is a great example actually, because all the startups started coming to my TransferWise is from Estonia. So all these amazing founders from Estonia have been giving a great like roadmap to that country specifically, but also for us as a post-Soviet Union country. And it's only 1.3 million population. Can you imagine? And another benefit from venture capital, which I was talking about for Estonia, I just remembered, which Georgia could adopt, is that once you have these unicorns and the founders who cash out, these people have reinvested in their country, in the new founders, in the new startups. They have not taken their money. That's why I appreciate the tech startup founders. The mentality is not to just run and buy villas and in majority cases and buy this. Also, you might as well, but why not? But at the same time, they reinvest in other people, in other founders. Initial stage startups are mostly their founders. That's who people invest in. So having those kind of people who understand who you are from your cultural background standpoint and understand the startup roads of startups go through is a huge boost for each country. And we are still looking for those kind of people. We have couple probably in Georgia, but not in the numbers of Estonia.
Yeah, but as the Greeks say, siga siga, slowly, slowly. Rome wasn't the Acropolis wasn't built in a day. And yes, I think what you're saying about these founders reinvesting in other founders, the entrepreneurship, that's what's so inspiring to me about the entrepreneurship community. Whether you're an entrepreneur or not, if you have that mentality, you realize that like people, your network, like the drive that others have is what keeps each other going, right? Like a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think that's really powerful. And yeah.
Exactly.
So the last question I have for you before we wrap up is, what uncharted waters are ahead for you, your venture, your ideas, anything else that might be floating around in your head?
From my startup standpoint or in general? I know.
Whatever, your personal venture, Georgia Tech, however you want to approach it.
So where to start? So just to combine all the points that we have been talking about. First of all, we are in a sense that we have seen, I love this ecosystem and the people involved in this ecosystem so much because of the sharing again. Just to bring example of my startup, payments service provider startup that we are building is a good example because me and my co-founder, we had a completely different idea. Of course, it was still in payments. That's the only connection this idea has to the idea that we had 1.5 year ago, then when we started. But since then, we met so many startups in e-commerce, our friends who have been just like so open to sharing their problems. I don't see any other industry that is doing this much sharing. Because they keep pushing us now. What's interesting? We still have to release our MVP, and they're like, okay, when is it going to happen so that we can together test it? It's not like, oh, I need it because of just my bettering my product, but we are here to test it together with you. So. That's, I think, they are our future clients in a sense, right? And I have never been a salesman in my life, but I understand that I'm talking to my future clients, but this is so fun and so inspiring and so such a, how to say, like type of workshops, like very conversations that bring a lot of value to us and hopefully them as well. So by bringing this product to life, so that has been a great for myself being part of this ecosystem. So I believe the same thing is everywhere in the world in this field. But at the same time, I really want to do something for everyone in this field, not just myself. So if I don't want to repeat myself that much, but if someone else makes it, that's a boost for me as well. And if I can play a role in someone raising money, for example, or connecting my friend, even not a friend, but a fellow founder to a potential investor, that would make me so happy, So that idea is really flowing in my head, and I hope I can contribute to Georgia startup ecosystem by any means, So talking to you is inspiring, because hearing what you are doing for Greek startups and hearing your am I back? I kind of.
You're back.
Yes.
So
yes, this is it pretty much.
well, on that uplifting note, thank you, Gega, for your time and for teaching us all about the Georgian startup ecosystem. This was such a fun chat. And on that connector note, this video will be available on YouTube after. So for anybody that is currently watching or will be watching, we'll throw Gega's LinkedIn information and company information into the description, so you can reach out there. And thank you again to everyone who has tuned in, for everyone for your time and for sticking around and learning about our startup ecosystems. And a quick plug for next week. Next week's our last week in the series, Tuesday and Thursday, same time. We're chatting with some more thought leaders, and you can find that in the link in the description as well. And Gega, let's definitely continue this conversation. Maybe we can do something like a digital roadshow or other ways to collaborate. It's such a pleasure being connected.
That's why I love same as well. That's why I love sharing these ideas with each other, because brainstorming these ideas, something pops up always, So no pressure ever, but if I was telling you, right, once I saw Greek startup news on my LinkedIn feed, immediately I thought of you and I shared those details. And it's nothing in retrospect, but in reality, it's just sharing our thoughts and ideas with each other. And I'd love to continue these talks. And maybe once the travel opens up and we have some startup grind or something, you guys would be great to have you here and show our country on one hand and show the Georgian startups on another hand.
Done. It's a done deal. I look forward to it. Thank you again. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Later. Bye.
Thank you.